What's up, everyone? Today we're talking about the Thursday night football game from last night and reacting to that. And then we're going to go over all the Week 3 matchups plus my start sits for Week 3 coming right up. What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Gridiron Fantasy Football Podcast. Today is Friday, September 25th, 2020. And I am Chip, and I'm your host, and thank you so much for listening today. If you're a new listener, thank you so much for joining us as well. If you'd like to support and share our podcast, you can find us over on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and now on Amazon Music. If you'd like to watch us, you can watch us over on YouTube at Gridiron Fantasy Football. So please don't forget to hit subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss another episode. And let's start off with the Thursday night football game. I mean, you're talking about the good, the bad, and the Gardner Minshew. I mean, it was an awful game for the Jags. I mean, the Miami Dolphins won 31-13. And, man, start off with Gardner Minshew. And I want to apologize to all the listeners who were listening and chose Gardner Minshew as a guy that you can stream. Or if he was like on that fringe QB1 and you're dealing with injuries, the guy that you were going to play. I played him in 2 of my leagues, and I was very disappointed. But it's one of those things. That's fantasy football. The matchup was so juicy. You start believing in a guy that feels like you can, feel comfortable playing. And then he throws out a dud like that, and it was unfortunate. I mean, DJ Chark did not play, and I think he has so much importance to that offense. Now we come to realize like how much importance that DJ Chark does have to that offense, and it's just one of those things where he had an awful game. I mean, he only he had 275 yards passing, but he had no touchdowns. He had a fumble, he had interception, just a bad game in all for Gardner Minshew. And but on the positive side for the Jags, man, James Robinson had a breakout game. I mean, he's a guy that, unfortunately, he was on my bench because I have already 3 studs that I play at the running back position in my leagues. But James Robinson, the guy that had a great game. He was 11 for 46 and 2 rushing touchdowns. He added that with another 6 receptions for 83 yards. Had over 30 PPR points last night. So Robinson's becoming a guy I think is going to be able to be a weekly starter based on your formats and based on who you already have. I mean, one of my leagues I have Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook, and Miles Sanders, and I have Robinson on the bench. So definitely he could be a trade piece for me, or a guy that I'm able to play based on matchups, depending on the matchups for Dalvin Cook or even Miles Sanders. But great game from James Robinson, and you know what? I mean, honestly, Robinson, he's now the most recent player to have 300 yards from scrimmage in the first 3 games. He has 339 yards so far total. And, that's a great thing to have. I mean, Saquon Barkley was the last person to do that, and that was back in 2018. So James Robinson is definitely becoming a guy that you can probably start every single week. So good for him. I like seeing stories like that. Undrafted free agent, coming into a league that, you go on a team that already has, Leonard Fournette. They get rid of Leonard Fournette, and he becomes the guy. So really cool to see. And on the Dolphins side of the ball, if you played Preston Williams, I mean, you got a touchdown out of him. Mike Gesicki had a touchdown, and then, Jordan Howard scored. So I had mentioned in the podcast earlier in the week that Myles Gaskin is going to be a guy that I think is going to take majority of the carries and the work from the backfield, and he did. He's a guy who had 22 carries for 66 yards, and then he added another 5 receptions for 29 yards. So he didn't get the touchdown because I believe, when it comes down to goal line work, Jordan Howard is going to be the guy that's going to be the guy. So I think that the touchdowns will come for Gaskins, but he's starting to become a guy that you may be able to put in a flex going forward, just because now it looks like he's definitely the front runner in that backfield. And then, with Preston Williams, he was a guy that I had to play because I'm in a deeper roster league where we played 3 wide receivers, and it looked good on that first drive. He scored a touchdown, and everything was good, but then he didn't really do much after that. He had 1 reception after that. Devontae Parker had a decent PPR game last night, but just one of those things where it's one of those boom bust type of players where when you play a guy like Williams, you just don't know exactly what's going to happen. But I'm not disappointed. He scored a touchdown, so that's all I can ask. When it comes to a guy that's my 3rd wide receiver. But Ryan Fitzpatrick. I mean, he went from Ryan Fitztragic to Ryan Fitzmagic last night. He had a very good fantasy outing. He had 3 total touchdowns. Now this is, for him, now 7 games in his career where he has a passing touchdown, a rushing touchdown. He has rushed for more than 30 yards. So that's a pretty cool thing and a pretty cool stat to think about. I mean, Fitzpatrick has definitely been around the league for quite some time. He's a guy that's always been like that Band-Aid, because we know that Tua is going to start at some point this season. But, Ryan Fitzpatrick, he's just a fun guy. He's a guy that you can tell at 37 years old, he just loves continuing to play football. He's a guy that really doesn't care, if he throws 6 touchdowns or 6 interceptions, whatever. He's a guy that's always going to have fun. And we look at what he did after the game last night. He had a post-game interview with NFL Network, and he comes out with, this Hawaiian-looking shirt with pineapples on. He's wearing like dolphin sweatpants, and then his buttons are not, buttoned up. His hamburger meat's hanging out of his shirt. I mean, just a guy who seems like a fun guy to have a beer with or something like that, and just tell stories. I mean, just a fun guy. And I'm glad that the Dolphins were able to win. So you never know that the Dolphins could be one of those surprise teams that win games later on in the year, and you may still have potential fantasy options from them. So good game overall for the Dolphins. It's good to see them win a game this year. But moving on, let's go on to over the matchups for Week 3. The first game is going to be the Bears versus the Falcons. And Atlanta is going to be favored in this game by 3.5 points. The over-under is 47.5. When it comes to fantasy options, I like going through all the matchups to tell you who I think are good fantasy options based on where I think who you should start, who you should sit, the boom-bust players, and then guys that could be flex options. So, obviously, the must-starts in this game, you're going to start Matt Ryan. I think David Montgomery deserves to be started, especially in the RB2 range. Todd Gurley, example, he's a guy that you can start. Obviously, Todd Gurley's not having the season that we had hoped. I had him as a bounce-back player this year, but right now he's sitting around like in PPR formats around running back 34. So Todd Gurley is definitely not showing what we had hoped. And maybe there was something about what happened with the Rams last year, and it's coming to show that right now. I know it's only been 2 weeks, but Todd Gurley has not returned the draft value that you had drafted him at, and hopefully it's a turnaround game for him at some point. But right now, you have to play Todd Gurley. I mean, you have to be, if you're starting him in a league where you have 2 RB positions, which most of us will, you have to play Todd Gurley. You just have to deal with it, and hopefully he scores a touchdown or he finally gets some more yardage and stuff like that. But unfortunate for Todd Gurley. And with wide receivers, I think, Calvin Ridley obviously is a must start. He is the overall number 2 wide receiver for fantasy right now in PPR formats. He's a guy you have to play. He's a must start every week. Allen Robinson, he didn't have a good showing last week, but he's the wide receiver 1 for the Bears. You have to play him. I mean, he's a guy that, last year had 153 targets, and I know that's last year, but he is a focal point of that offense, and I think he's a guy that you should be able to play. And then Hayden Hurst. I think Hayden Hurst is a tight end that should be played. He's a guy that had a great game last week, and the Bears are not very good against the tight end. So I think that Hayden Hurst is a must start this week. And then when it comes to flex options, I think Tariq Cohen really in this game is the only guy that I would put in the flex, just because, especially in PPR formats, because he's a guy that's always going to be part of the offense. And then Jimmy Graham, if you really need tight end help, and you're unable to get one of the free agents off the waiver wire that were, some of the guys that I had on my list this week, maybe Jimmy Graham's a guy that you could grab and try to play. I mean, the Falcons are not good at the tight end as well, so there's a chance that Jimmy Graham could do something this week. And then for the boom bust players this week, I do have Julio Jones on this spot because it doesn't look like Julio Jones is healthy, and he's dealing with a hamstring injury, so he's been limited in practice all week. So obviously, if you have Julio Jones, you have to play him. But I think you have to, have low expectations on what you think he will do, because he may be a decoy. He may not play very much, and so. But when he's activated, you have to play him. That's the unfortunate thing. Just like Mike Evans a couple weeks ago, if he's activated, you have to play him, and hopefully he gets a touchdown or something. But Julio Jones is almost trending like he's not going to play. But just so pay attention to all the injury updates going through the weekend. And another guy I think is a boom bust candidate is Russell Gage, especially if Julio Jones does not play. Right now, Russell Gage is number 2 on the Falcons out on target share. So I think Russell Gage, if Julio Jones is out, will have a decent game you can put in, hopefully hope for the best. And obviously in this game, you're going to sit Mitch Trubisky. You're not going to play him. He's not a guy that should be played in one quarterback formats. And then Anthony Miller's another guy. I was high on Anthony Miller this year. He did well for me in week 1 on my own roster, but he's not showing me enough right now to make me want to have him on my roster or even start, and even in a flex. But if you're in a deeper league, I understand that. But Anthony Miller is a guy that I just can't really rely on as of right now. And then going on to the Rams versus the Bills. Buffalo's favored for by 2 points, and over-under is 47.5. The guys that you're going to start in this game, you're going to start Josh Allen. And now Devin Singletary is a guy that you must start because Zach Moss is out. So Devin Singletary is going to get more usage. So he could be a guy who could have a very good week, a sneaky week this week. Obviously, you're going to play Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp. Stephon Diggs is a must start, and also Tyler Higbee. So these are the guys that you're going to start in this game. As your flex options, on this game, I think John Brown does have that option of being a good flex. I think that he definitely is a talented wide receiver. Obviously, he had a big game in week 1. I think that if you really need that wide receiver help based on injury, he's a good guy to put in your flex. And then the boom bust guys for this matchup, I really think is Darrell Henderson and Malcolm Brown. I know Darrell Henderson was a hot commodity when it came to free agents this week on the waiver wire, but we don't know exactly who's going to get the most carries. I mean, it was only Darrell Henderson last week had 12 carries, Malcolm Brown had 11. So it's all about what they do with those carries, and it could be a game where Malcolm Brown could be the starting running back. So I would hate to have you guys play Darrell Henderson or Malcolm Brown, and then you're disappointed because they chose one guy was more efficient with their carries. So I have Malcolm Brown, and I'm not gonna play him because I feel like I would rather wait and see who separates themselves. It doesn't look like that's how Sean McVay is going to do the running back position, but it's just a crapshoot with those two. And then obviously Cam Akers, he's gonna be out for in week 3. But I think that as of right now, it's hard to play these guys based on how they kind of do their running back by committee. And then my sit of the week, not of the week, but of this game is going to be Jared Goff. I think that the Bills' defense is a really strong defense, and I think there are going to be better options for you than Jared Goff. But if you have Jared Goff and he's your best quarterback, you're going to play him. The next game is Washington versus the Browns. In this game, the Cleveland Browns are favored by 7 points. The over-under is 43.5. The must-starts for this game is Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt continues to be implemented into the offense a lot more, and I think that from this, this week and going forward, Kareem Hunt's a guy that you at least put in your flex. He's a guy that's going to be, he's part of the game plan, and they're making a point to use both running backs. So Kareem Hunt's a viable option every week. And then for Washington, Antonio Gibson, he's in that fringe RB2 range this week. You're going to start him. And at wide receiver, you're going to start Terry McLaurin. He's the number 1 wide receiver for the Washington football team, so he's a guy that you're going to play. And then on Cleveland's side of the ball, OBJ, he's a guy that you're going to start, but I'm a little hesitant. I'm going to bench him in one of my leagues because I have Terry McLaurin playing. I have Juju. So I'm going to play those two over OBJ this week. It's a guy that he has elite talent, obviously, but he came out in an interview this week and he said that he knows this is a run-heavy offense. He knows that he's not going to get the fancy numbers that he's hoping for. So with that being the case, he's starting to become more of a he's not becoming a must start anymore. He's a guy that if the matchup's good, I'm going to put him out there. But I just think that OBJ right now is starting to become more irrelevant in fantasy in a sense of like being that elite wide receiver. He's a guy that you're going to have to play because he's so talented, but with them being a run heavy offense, it's going to be hard to see him get like huge numbers like we're used to or from OBJ. And then in the flex, if you have to, Jarvis Landry's a guy you can put in the flex. I think he obviously in PPR format gives you some value, but if I have another option somewhere else, I'm going to go with that. And then the sits for this game, I'm going to obviously sit Baker Mayfield. Dwayne Haskins is going to be a sit for me. And Austin Hooper, he's going to be a sit for me. I want to see more out of him before I start putting him in my lineup and relying on him. He only has like four receptions the whole entire season. And with David Njoku out, you think that he would have been targeted more, but I just don't think Austin Hooper is a guy that you're going to start in every week, because I'm starting to wonder if the product of Austin and Hooper was the product of like the Atlanta Falcons offense and Matt Ryan. And I think that Austin Hooper definitely is talented, but I'm just wondering if Matt Ryan made him who he was in a sense of like fantasy relevant. And so I think Austin Hooper is a guy that I'm going to sit and wait and see what happens. Now going on to the Titans versus the Vikings. Right now the Titans are favored by 2.5 points. The over-under is 47.5. The must-starts in this game, I think Ryan Tannehill definitely is going to be a guy that you can start. He's had 17 points on average the last few games, going back to last year as well. So Ryan Tannehill is definitely in that talk of starting. It's a good matchup. The Vikings defense is not the Vikings defense of old, so I think Ryan Tannehill has a good game. Obviously, you're going to start Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry has started off slow, but it'll take some time for him to get himself, ready. But I think Derrick Henry is a good start. Obviously, you're going to start Dalvin Cook. I think you have to start Adam Thielen. He's the number one wide receiver for the Vikings. I know Kirk Cousins has been having a bad season so far, but Adam Thielen's a guy that you drafted him to be your wide receiver one. So you have to play him. And I think Jonnu Smith is a tight end for the Titans that you need to play. He has 19% of the target share for the Titans. This is a guy that I think will continue to have good games as long as A.J. Brown is out. So Jonnu Smith is going to be a guy that I'm going to play. And then in the flex, Corey Davis. I think Corey Davis definitely deserves to have some consideration for the flex. He's a guy that's gaining more playing time because A.J. Brown is out. So he's a guy that I would, put in the flex. And then the boom bust candidates for this. Now this guy, obviously, Alexander Mattison, he's a talented running back. And I know that sounds like a very weird thing to say in the sense of why would I start Alexander Mattison? But look, if you're desperate due to injury, right? Alexander Madison's a guy who does get the ball, so he could break off a run just like Dalvin Cook can. So if you really need help, you're not able to get any of the top free agents this week, and you're just really hurting that running back position, but you do have, say you did draft Alexander Mattison, you could play him. But I would, like I said, have your expectations very altered because you don't know exactly how that's going to play out. But I think he could, be a consideration if you really need it, if you're desperate. And I think Adam Humphrey is the guy that you could try to roll with if you're in a PPR format and you're hurting out wide receiver as well. And then to sit in this game, I'm sitting Kirk Cousins. I don't think if you're in a 2 quarterback league or you're in a super flex league, I think he's under consideration because you have to play 2 quarterbacks. But if you're in a 1 quarterback league, I'm not touching Kirk Cousins anymore. I think he's a guy that just has been struggling, and I think there's a guy who has potential to have good games, but I want to see more out of him before I put him back out there and start him in my lineup. But yeah, Kirk Cousins is definitely a sit for me this week. And going on to the Raiders versus the Patriots. The Patriots are at home and they're favored by 6.5 points. It's the over-under of 47.5. You're going to start Cam Newton. Now, Josh Jacobs, this is going to be interesting because Josh Jacobs and Darren Waller have been out of practice and they've been very limited in practice. So there's a chance that these two cannot play this week. So that's going to be very interesting based on your fantasy lineups. But if they're playing, you're going to play Josh Jacobs. Julian Edelman's a guy that you're going to play. Him and Cam Newton have a good connection right now. And then Darren Waller, he's a guy that you have to, at least wait and see what happens with him. But he's a start if he's healthy and ready to play. But if Josh Jacobs can't play and you're in a pinch to find somebody, you don't have anybody on the waiver wire that you could have gotten last week, then Devontae Booker's the guy that will take over and get some snaps, and Jalen Richard's gonna be another guy. So just be ready just in case Josh Jacobs isn't active. And then when it comes to boom bust players for this game, Sony Michel is one of those guys because James White is not going to be playing this week. He's going to be out. So it looks like Sony Michel's going to get the majority of the hand, the rushing attempts. So I think he's a guy that if you need running back help, he's another option for you. And then N'Keal Harry is a guy that you could try to see what happens with him. It looks like Cam Newton has Julian Edelman and N'Keal Harry as his 2 top targets. So he could have a good game against this defense. And then I'm going to sit Derek Carr this week. Ruggs is out. He's now considered out, so obviously you're not going to play him. And Hunter Renfrow is a guy that you are going to sit this week. I just don't feel confident in the Raiders offense, especially if they don't have Jacobs, they don't have Waller. That's going to be a tough outing for the Raiders. And going on to the 49ers versus the Giants. The 49ers are favored by 4.5 points, and the over-under is 40.5. So if you're able to get Jerick McKinnon this week in the waiver wire, then you're going to start Jerick McKinnon. He's the guy that's in a run-heavy offense. So if you're able to get him and you need help at running back, I would start him. Kittle is out. So based on today's practice reports, the 49ers came out and said that George Kittle will not be playing this week. So Jordan Reed becomes a viable option at the tight end position. He had 2 touchdowns last week, so he's definitely a guy that you can play. And then Evan Ingram, looks like he's the number 1 target right now for Daniel Jones, so I'm going to play Evan Ingram. And then in the flex, I think Darius Slayton becomes a viable option there in the flex. And for my boom bust this week, it's pretty much the whole Giants backfield, right? You probably spent a lot of money on Deion Lewis, and I just don't see it being a every down back. I don't think that he's gonna be a guy that you can rely on and start because of him being the guy that took over for Barkley when he went out. But Wayne Gallman was inactive last week, so I have a hunch that Wayne Gallman, in this game in particular, Wayne Gallman is going to get the most of the touches, and Deion Lewis is going to be the change of pace back. Because I don't think Devontae Freeman he's not ready. He just got signed. So he may get a couple snaps. He may be active, but I'm not touching this backfield. Even if you got Dion Lewis, I'm not playing Dion Lewis. Even if you are a Barkley owner, I understand if you're a Barkley owner and you have no more running back options and you only have Dion Lewis, you're going to have to play him. But if you have other options that may be a lot better than him, I'm going to play those guys other than Dion Lewis. I want to see what happens in the work share of these guys in the backfield before I decide to play a certain player in this backfield. And then another boom bust guy is Jeff Wilson Jr. of the 49ers. I know Jerick McKinnon is going to get the start, but Jeff Wilson, even last year when they had Matt Breida and Tevin Coleman, he was a guy that had a good game. If sometimes they got the hot hand, and if Jeff Wilson has a hot hand, I think he's a guy that's going to be a good player in a pinch if you really need it. And then Golden Tate's another guy because right now Sterling Shepard's out. He's a guy that now with another receiver out, you're going to have more increases in targets. So I think Golden Tate is a guy that if you need to, he can be a guy that you can put as a very low end wide receiver. And then you're going to sit Daniel Jones and Nick Mullins in this game. I don't think there's any reason to start these two, especially in one quarterback leagues. All right, now going on to the Bengals versus the Eagles. The Philadelphia Eagles are favored by 6 points. The over-under is 46. The starts for this game, I'm going to start Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow has shown enough, in the first 2 games of the season that I feel like he can have a good game against the Eagles. I think that, he's obviously a talented guy. He did a good job against a decent Browns defense. So I think that Joe Burrow becomes that fringe QB1 this week. At the running back position, you're going to play Joe Mixon. I know that Joe Mixon's been a disappointment this year, but I think he's the guy that you have to play. He either draft him as your RB1, your RB2, and that draft stock, you're going to have to play him. You don't want to have him go, bonkers on your bench. So play him, and hopefully he has a good game. But I think Joe Mixon will turn out at some point. But as of right now, you can't give up on him right now. And then on the Eagles side of the ball, you're going to start Miles Sanders. He's a must start every single week. He had a great game last week, and I think he continues to flourish this year. I think he was one of my breakout players this year, so it's good to see Miles Sanders back. And at the tight end position, you're going to play Zach Ertz, and you're going to play Dallas Goedert. That's one of the 2 guys that are the 2 top targets for Carson Wentz in this offense, so go ahead and play those guys with confidence. In the flex, you're going to play A.J. Green. I think A.J. Green and Tyler Boyd are 2 top targets for Joe Burrow, and A.J. Green has been just inches away of being a very, very good wide receiver in fantasy this year. They have not connected yet, but they're going to get on the same page. I believe that Joe Burrow and A.J. Green will be a good tandem this year. It hasn't happened yet, but I think that those 2, at least A.J. Green is going to have a decent fantasy outing. And then on the Eagles side of the ball, I think Deshaun Jackson has the potential to have a good game. There's decimated at the wide receiver position. Jalen Reagor just went out again for the year for, having surgery on his thumb. He's going to be out for 6 to 8 weeks. So Deshaun Jackson now is really the only wide receiver that you could play in this offense. So he's a guy that you definitely can be considered in the flex. And then you're sitting Carson Wentz. I hate to say this, but Carson Wentz is not looking good. I know that he's been pressured a lot throughout the year, but he just needs to turn it on. He's a guy that is super talented, and I think Carson Wentz needs to just be sat in this game just because it's just one of those things where I just want to see more out of him. I want to see that switch be turned on where he's going to be that viable fantasy option. But right now, I'm willing to wait and see on that case. So Carson Wentz is a sit for me. And then going to the Texans versus Steelers, Pittsburgh is favored by 3.5 points. The over-under is 46. And the must-starts in this game, you're going to start Deshaun Watson. I know you probably don't have better options out there than Deshaun Watson. I'm afraid that they're going to shut down the running game, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I think that they're going to make him throw the ball and make them one-dimensional. So I think that Deshaun Watson, even though you have to start him, I would have low expectations for him. I think you're going to start Big Ben. I think Big Ben's had a good season so far. I think that he's a viable option to play as a fringe QB1. At the running back position, you're going to play James Conner, and you're playing David Johnson. I think that this is it's a better option for James Conner this week, but David Johnson, in PPR formats, he can be a receiver. He's the safety net for Deshaun Watson, so he obviously is a start for me. And at the wide receiver position, I'm playing Deontay Johnson and Juju. Juju came out on Instagram today saying that he's going to play, so there was some indication that he may not based on the injury that he was dealing with, but he's going to play this week. And then Deontay Johnson, he's owning right now 34% of the target share for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm playing him. He's been a guy that I felt could have had a breakout season this year, and it's starting to happen. I don't think he's going to maintain the 34% of the target share, but Deontay Johnson's a guy that you can start. And then the boom bust players for this game is Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks. Will Fuller, he's super talented, but it's not happening for him this year. But he's a guy who can go off in any moment. So if you have Will Fuller and you have you don't have better options at your wide receiver position, then I can understand why you have to play him. But just have low expectations because this defense is really good. And so I think Brandon Cooks and Will Fuller could have just average games this week. And going to the Jets versus the Colts, this should be an easy win for the Colts. I mean, the over-under right now is 43, and the Colts are favored by 10.5 points. So they have no faith that Adam Gase and the New York Jets are going to do anything against the Colts. But the must-starts in this game, you're starting Jonathan Taylor. T.Y. Hilton is a must-start for me. And I think because how much Phillip Rivers likes the tight end position, I think Mo Alley Cox is the guy that you consider at the tight end position. The boom bust for this game, I think Nyheim Hines is a boom bust for this game. He didn't have a good game last week. I know that he was one of the top waiver wire ads for after week 1, but I think that maybe could have been an anomaly. So I think that he does get some involvement with the offense, and this is a game where he could have a bounce back game. So Hines, could be considered a flex option for you. And then Frank Gore, only because Frank Gore is Frank Gore. He's a guy that gets all the goal line carries, and he's the guy that's right now the starter. So don't have high expectations, but because this offense is not very good. But if you really need a running back and you're in a pinch, Frank Gore could be an option. And then for me, Michael Pittman Jr. I think this is a guy that you could play. He's a guy that took over. He took over that wide receiver 2 position last week because Paris Campbell went down, and he actually ran the most routes for any Indianapolis Colts wide receiver. So that being the case, he's on the field, he's running the routes. I think at some point he's going to get that fantasy production. So Michael Pittman could be an option. And then you're going to sit Phillip Rivers and Sam Darnold. I just think there's better options out there. So I don't think those two guys are guys that you should be considered playing. Now moving on to the Panthers versus the Chargers. The Chargers are favored by 6.5 points. The over-under is 43.5. And you're going to start in this game Mike Davis. He's taking over for Christian McCaffrey. So Mike Davis is a must-start. You're obviously going to start Austin Eckler in this game. At wide receiver, you're going to start DJ Moore, Keenan Allen. And then at tight end, you're going to play Hunter Henry. In the flex, you can play Joshua Kelly. I think Joshua Kelly is becoming the guy that you can feel comfortable playing because he had over 20-something carries last week. So he's a guy that's definitely running the ball. And then Robbie Anderson, he's a guy that you can play in the flex. He's one of 2 wide receivers that has both week 1 and week 2 has over 100 yards receiving. So they're using him in Carolina. So he's a guy that you could put in your flex. And Mike Williams, he's a guy that he's in that fringe, like he's that fringe like flex play, but also a boom bust type of player because he could have 2 touchdowns and a crazy catch, or he gets nothing. So I think he's a guy that if you need to play him, especially in deeper leagues. And I'm going to sit Teddy Bridgewater and Justin Herbert this week. I'm just not going to trust, even though the Carolina Panthers are not a good defense, I want to see what a week of preparation that now that he is the starter, I want to see what Justin Herbert does before I feel comfortable even playing him. But you're not playing him unless you're in a 2-quarterback league. So, and you have an injury at quarterback. I'm not playing Justin Herbert. So with that, I'm going on to the Lions versus the Cardinals. The line here is the Arizona is favored by 5.5 points. The over-under is 54.5. So they're assuming there's going to be a lot of points scored in this game. You're going to start Kyler Murray. I think Matthew Stafford becomes a start in this game. Kenyon Drake, even though he hasn't had the fancy production that we were hoping for this year, you're going to start Kenyon Drake. Obviously, DeAndre Hopkins is a must start. And I think that if you really need the tight end help, TJ Hawkinson is another option for you at tight end. In the flex, this is tough because I don't like the Lions backfield, but DeAndre Swift and Adrian Peterson are 2 guys that could be viable options in the flex. Marvin Jones also. I think Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay. I put Kenny Golladay in this category because he's still dealing with the hamstring injury. He's still been limited in practice, so I don't see how. I don't know if he's gonna be activated on Sunday, but I still think that he's a flex option because of the injury. If he was fully healthy, I would say he's a must start. But right now, I have him in that category. And then you're not gonna play Christian Kirk or Larry Fitzgerald. There's just 2 guys that are not viable options for your fantasy lineup. So I still think this is going to be a decent game. I like watching Kyler Murray. I like Matthew Stafford, but I just think those are the guys I'm going with in that game. And going to the Bucs versus the Broncos, Tampa Bay is favored by 6. The over-under is 43. This was a tough one for me because I think because of the defense being what it is for Denver, I think Tom Brady becomes that fringe QB1 this week. I think the Bucs do blow out the Broncos, but could this be a game where the Bucs get Chris Godwin back, so they have all their options available to them on offense? I'm wondering if the Bucs get such a huge lead that they just run the ball. So Tom Brady for me is that fringe QB1 this week. But I'm going to start Melvin Gordon. You're starting Chris Godwin. You're starting Mike Evans. And I think you're starting Noah Fant. He's definitely a safety outlet for Jeff Driscoll. I think that's a guy that he could be targeted a lot just because of the pass rush and all that, and him just having that safety net. So in the flex, I think Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones are options. And the reason why I have this is a game where I don't think Ronald Jones has fully lost the job to Leonard Fournette. But if Leonard Fournette continues to have outings like he did last week, it's going to be a matter of time when Leonard Fournette knows the playbook and is playing better that he becomes a starter. I still think in around October-ish, like mid-October, that Leonard Fournette becomes the full-time starter. But right now, if you have any of those options, I think that Leonard Fournette or Ronald Jones could be considered in your flex. And Jerry Jeudy, I think, could be considered in your flex as well because Courtland Sutton's out with the ACL tear rest of the season. So he becomes the number one target for the Denver Broncos. So right now, I mean, it's slim pickings right now because there's a lot of injuries. So you have to play the guys that you have. So Jerry Jeudy, he's a talented wide receiver. He's a rookie, but he's a guy that you could be considered in the flex. And then the boom bust player, and this is more in the PPR fantasy formats. Scotty Miller's a guy that Tom Brady continues to like. I'm not saying you have to play him, but like I said, if you're dealing with injuries, and you're in PPR format in a deeper league, I think Scotty Miller's a guy that you could pick up and play. And then you're going to sit Jeff Driscoll, not a viable option in any formats. I'm going to sit O.J. Howard, and I'm going to sit Gronk. I was big on Rob Gronkowski before the season. I felt like even though Bruce Arians doesn't really implement the tight end in his offense very much, I felt like with Tom Brady being the quarterback, I felt Gronk would be more implemented. And I was watching his press conference from today, and he even said that he came to Tampa to block. Now, he could be joking, but he only has 4 targets out in the season, and I just don't think that Rob Gronkowski right now is a guy that you're going to play and have in your lineup. I think he's a wait and see. He's definitely a hold for me on fantasy rosters, but I just don't think that Rob Gronkowski is right now a startable, tight end right now. So he's a sit for me this week. Now going on to the Cowboys versus the Seahawks. Seattle's favored by 4.5 points. This is going to be a 55.5% or 55.5 over under. So they expect some firepower in this game. You're starting Dak Prescott. You're starting Russell Wilson. Obviously Chris Carson, Zeke, Amari Cooper, Tyler Lockett, and DK Metcalf are the must starts in this game. In the flex, I think you can put Michael Gallup in there. Obviously, CeeDee Lamb's the guy that you can be in the flex, especially in that that fringe wide receiver 2 position. I think out of those 3 guys, I mean, they all 3 of them, like Cooper, Gallup, and Lamb, all have good favorable matchups in this game. Griffin for the Seahawks, the corner, Shaquille Griffin, he is the guy he's the best corner. I still think that Cooper could really do some damage against him this game, but I think that every receiver for the Cowboys this week are viable options. And then the boom bust for me in this game is Greg Olsen. If Russell Wilson is under pressure, and Greg Olsen is always a guy that's always found to be in that position to have that touchdown or have those receptions because of the play breaking down and him being there as a safety net. So Greg Olsen's a possible tight end if you really need a tight end. And then I'm sitting Dalton Schultz. I know he's a guy that was one of those names that I brought up in the waiver wire episode, but this game's gonna be a tough matchup for him. He's going against Jamal Adams, the safety for the Seattle Seahawks, and I just think for this game he's just not a guy that I'm gonna play unless there's just no more options I have in my league for tight end. So moving on to the Sunday night football game, the Packers versus the Saints. Right now New Orleans is favored by 3 points. The over/under is 52. You're also going to start Aaron. He's a guy that obviously is having a good season, but Aaron Rodgers and Aaron Jones are 2 guys that you have to start, obviously. And then Alvin Kamara, you're going to start him. He's going to have a monster game, I think, this game. And then you're going to start Jared Cook. I mean, Drew Brees does not have options right now, wide receiver. He's very slim pickings. I mean, you got Jared Cook, you got Emmanuel Sanders, and you got Traquan Smith. That's what he has. And I think there's still not really powerful in the sense of like what they can do on the offensive side of the ball. So Alvin Kamara seems to be the guy that's going to be the one with the production. In the flex, because Devontae Adams could be out this game. It's not looking likely he's going to play. So if you have Allen Lazard or Marquez Valdes-Scantling, I think those are two guys that you can play. However, those two could be lined up against Marcus Lattimore or Janoris Jenkins. Those are two corners that are complement. They're very good corners, and I think that you have to be careful on what you expect out of those two. Even if Devontae Adams is out, it could be two matchups that could be very tough for them to move the ball down the field. So this could be another Aaron Jones game. And then, like I said, in my boom bust category, I got Traquan Smith. He's the only wide receiver that did anything on Monday Night Football when they had Michael Thomas out with this ankle injury. So with that being the case, I think he's a guy that you could put in your flex if you need it. And then I'm sitting Drew Brees in this game and Emmanuel Sanders. Emmanuel Sanders is a very talented wide receiver. But the fact of the matter is that he had one reception in the last minute of the game on Monday night. I'm not feeling confident in Drew Brees or Emmanuel Sanders. I want to see more out of Drew Brees before I feel confident in putting on my starting lineup again. And then going to the Monday Night Football game, Chiefs versus the Ravens. The Baltimore is favored by 3.5 points, and over is going to be 53. You're going to start Lamar Jackson. You're starting Mahomes. You're starting Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Tyreek Hill is a must start. You're going to start Marquise Brown. And obviously the two tight ends, Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews, you're going to start. Now, this gets a little interesting when it comes to the running back position for the Baltimore Ravens. I think you can put Mark Ingram in your flex, but the problem is that what if J.K. Dobbins does something? Because in the first week, he had the 2 touchdowns. In the second week, Gus Edwards was the leading running back, but Mark Ingram had a touchdown off the Wildcat play that they did. So that's a hard position to figure out. I don't want any part of it, but if you have to, I think Mark Ingram is the guy that you should play in the flex. Like I said, my boom bust for this game is J.K. Dobbins. And then Mecole Hardman becomes a guy that is a boom bust for me because Sammy Watkins is now in the concussion protocol. He went in the concussion protocol later on in the week, so that's now that the game is on Monday, there's still a slight chance that Sammy Watkins could play. But if he does not, I think Mecole Hardman becomes a guy that you can play, in a flex position. I'm hoping for a big play out of him. And then obviously, like I said, I'm going to sit Sammy Watkins. When a game is Monday night like this and you have no idea if he's going to be available, you have to have options. So I would rather play a guy that I know I will get points out of than play a guy that could get benched or inactive because of his injury, and I don't have an option available for me in that Monday night game. So I'm going to sit Sammy Watkins this week. If he plays and has a big game, at least he has a big game. But I'm gonna sit him this week. So, and that's all the matchups. I think those are all the players I think are relevant for all the games going into week 3. When it comes to defenses, I think there's a couple streaming defenses that you can pick up if they're available. I think the Colts are a good streaming defense. I think the Bucs have a good streaming defense this week only because they're going against Jeff Driscoll. Cortland Sutton's out. They've been very good against the run, so I think they could really stop Melvin Gordon. I think the Bucs have a good outing on the defense side of the ball. You can play the Browns defense. I think they can have a good game. The Titans are always a good defense, especially without having Clowney. I think they can be a team that you can stream. So that's it for this episode. And just for a reminder, don't forget to get any possible players that are injured or could be inactive into your flex, because if you put them in, have them in your wide receiver or your running back position and they don't play, you get a 0 for the week. So put any injured player, anybody that could be inactive, whoever has a late football game on Sunday Night Football game or Monday Night Football, put them in your flex so you have options just in case there is a surprise inactive. I know like last week, Tyrod Taylor, most of you guys were not playing him, but there's going to always be a situation where a player gets injured in pregame and then you're stuck. So always put your guys that have late games or injured or possible inactives in your flex. But if you have any other questions for week 3 when it comes to start sits for anything, please email me at my email at chip@gridironfantasyfootball.com. I'm going to try to respond to every email that gets sent to me. I want to be able to help you guys out as much as possible. So please send me those questions by email, and I'll leave the email in the description so you know how to reach me. And then that's it for today. Thanks for everyone who's listening. Please like, comment, and share this podcast and the YouTube video with anybody that you know. On the next episode, so tomorrow, I'm not doing a podcast, but I'll be doing my YouTube video, my weekly injury updates for week 3. I do that every Saturday. throughout the NFL season, but that's only on YouTube. So if you want to see the updates for any of the injuries taking place, please go to the YouTube channel. So that's it for today. I'll be back on Monday with the Monday podcast with my Week 3 reactions, all the fantasy studs for Week 3. So don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss that episode. If you'd like to follow us on social media, you can find us over on Instagram at Gridiron Fantasy Football. You can find us on Twitter and Facebook at the Gridiron Pod. So have a great day, and we'll see you all in the next episode. Take care.